Hospitals are strange places. Everything smells like bleach and silence. Even the walls seem like they're trying not to say anything. People walk past each other with eyes full of things they'll never speak. It's a place where time bends, where 5 minutes can feel like 5 hours, or like nothing at all. That's how long I was gone. 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. Dad had been in and out of consciousness all day. His breathing was shallow, like the air didn't want to stay inside his chest anymore. He wasn't hooked up to many machines, just the bare minimum to keep him comfortable. It was hospice care by that point. No more fighting. No more treatment. Just waiting. He had always said he didn't want to go like that, hooked up to tubes, strangers changing his sheets. But when the time came, he never complained. Not once. Even dying, he was the calmest person in the room. Mom sat beside him, holding his hand. To anyone walking by, it would have looked like love. Like quiet grief. Her head gently resting against his shoulder. Her lips moving in what looked like a prayer. But I knew her better. There was no sadness in her eyes. Just calculation. And behind that? Something else. Something I couldn't name yet. I'm going to grab a coffee, I said, standing slowly. You need anything? She didn't look up. Just shook her head. Her other hand rested lightly on Dad's chest. Possessive, almost. Like she wanted everyone to know that whatever was left of him, it belonged to her. The hallway was cold. Bright. Empty. I remember looking out the window at the hospital courtyard. The wind was rustling a few dead leaves across the stone benches. Everything felt suspended, like the world was holding its breath. I took maybe 4 sips of the vending machine coffee before I turned around and went back. When I stepped back into the room, I knew something had changed. There's a stillness that only comes when someone's gone. The monitors had been silenced. The 4 drip had been removed. And Dad was still gone. Mom was standing now, her purse clutched tightly to her chest. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. Is he? I asked. She didn't respond. Just nodded once and turned her back to me. She was fiddling with something. Slipping something into her bag. I didn't catch what it was, but the movement was too quick, too intentional. Then she looked at me, calm as ever. He passed peacefully, she said, her voice smooth and practiced. No trace of shock. No trembling. No moment of what do we do now. Just, closure. Controlled. Contained. A nurse entered the room a moment later, apologizing softly for being late with the vitals check. She looked surprised to find Mom already packing up. She asked if we wanted a chaplain. I nodded. Mom didn't. Then she excused herself to call the lawyer, not the funeral home, not family. The lawyer. That's when I noticed it. Dad's hand, the one I saw her holding when I left, had faint black ink smudges on the fingertips. And the pen from the bedside drawer? Gone. I said nothing. Not yet. Because even though every hair on the back of my neck was screaming, something's wrong. I couldn't imagine it. Couldn't form the thought fully. Not until later. The funeral arrangements were quick. Efficient. Like she'd had them queued up in a file somewhere, waiting. I stayed quiet. Let her have the space. Let her talk about flower arrangements and caskets and headstones. She picked out everything, even down to the engraving on the urn. Forever yours, DHW. His initials. But her words. I wondered if she even asked what he wanted. The next day, we were in the lawyer's office. He looked uncomfortable. There was a manila envelope on his desk, sealed and dated. Mom sat confidently beside me, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap like a queen receiving good news. The lawyer cleared his throat and began reading. To my beloved wife, he started, I leave our home, our joint assets, and all remaining funds under our names. My ears started ringing. To my son, there was a pause. The lawyer looked down. I wish him peace and fulfillment in his own journey. No property. No accounts. No business shares. Just a sentence that didn't sound like Dad at all. I didn't speak. Because something inside me had already begun unraveling. After the meeting, Mom patted my hand. He loved you in his own way, she said. And I looked her in the eye and saw it. No guilt. No grief. Just ownership. Like she had finally won. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the garage, Dad's space. Everything was still there, his tools, his sketches, the little wooden box where he used to keep things he didn't trust to drawers. And there, taped under the lid, was a USB drive. And inside that? A recording. His voice was weak. Raspy. But unmistakably his. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't get to say goodbye the way I wanted. Your mother. I'm sorry, son. I didn't know how deep it went. The real will is with Dr. Miles. He helped me notarize it. It's dated 2 months ago. If she shows you anything else, it's not what I signed. Don't let her take what I built for you. Not again. I love you. Always. I sat in the garage until sunrise. Everything made sense now. The smudges. The pen. The hurry. The calm. She hadn't just taken everything. She had used his dying body to forge the lie. But I wasn't going to fight her in court. I had something else in mind. I always thought the reading of a will would feel sacred. Quiet. Somber. Maybe even a little cinematic. But in reality, it felt like a business meeting. A lawyer in a stiff shirt, papers shuffled on a mahogany desk, and an air of practiced neutrality. Like grief was just another process to file. Mom sat beside me, still in her widow-black dress from the funeral, but with her posture somehow more upright than before. Composed. Ready. I, on the other hand, hadn't slept. Not since I heard Dad's voice on that recording. Not since the puzzle pieces began snapping together with terrifying ease. Not since I realized that I had been standing in the room while my mother forged my father's dying will with his barely functioning hand. And now, here we were. The lawyer cleared his throat and slid a thick document out of the envelope. This is the final testament and will of Edward Henry Walker, he began, fingers tapping the first page. Dated 3 weeks before his passing. 3 weeks. That was already a red flag. Because I knew, Dad had stopped signing any paperwork more than a month before that. His motor control was almost gone by then. I had helped him with his toothbrush. Watched his signature turn into a trembling line. And yet this document was pristine. No hesitation. No shakiness. Just, exact. The lawyer continued. To my wife, Evelyn Marie Walker, I leave the full ownership of our marital home, the remaining funds in our joint accounts, and full rights to distribute all remaining assets as she sees fit. I didn't blink. Because I was waiting for my name. Any second now. I imagined Dad's voice in my head, and to my son. The lawyer flipped the page. And to my son, I offer my full blessing, and the hope that he will pursue his future with strength, independence, and clarity of purpose. No property. No business. No personal effects. No mention of the workshop, the truck, the house plans he said were ours. Just a line you'd write in a yearbook. I looked at Mom. She didn't look at me. She was watching the lawyer. Like a queen at a coronation. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I wanted to ask the obvious question. Where's the will from 2 months ago? The one Dad had notarized. The one he told me about. But saying that out loud would have meant revealing I knew something. And I wasn't ready to show my hand yet. The lawyer folded the document back into the folder. If there are no objections, these terms will be finalized in 10 business days. Of course, Mom said. Sweetly. I nodded. And hell opened beneath my feet. Outside the office, relatives hugged her. Whispered condolences. Told her she was so strong. Someone even patted my shoulder and said. He always trusted her to handle things. It's what he wanted. I smiled. A fake one. Because I couldn't scream. Not yet. Over the next few days, Mom moved quickly. She listed Dad's truck for sale. Sold his tools to a neighbor. Began cleaning out the garage with startling speed. She kept saying things like, he wouldn't have wanted clutter. This house needs fresh energy. Let's not dwell on the past. She didn't cry. Not once. Meanwhile, I kept to myself. I started sorting through old family documents at night. Tax records. Deeds. Letters. Looking for a pattern. A trail. A missing page. I wasn't sure what I was hunting for. But I couldn't let it go. Because that what we heard? It wasn't just unkind. It was uncharacteristic. Dad wasn't perfect. But he was deliberate. And fair. He spent years talking about what he'd leave behind for me. He didn't believe in generational handouts, but he did believe in honoring hard work. He told me once, while we were sanding down a chair he built. This house. This garage. These tools. I earned them slow. I want you to earn even more, but not from scratch. You shouldn't have to start in the hole. That was Dad. And now, somehow, he'd written a will that gave me a pep talk. No. It didn't fit. Something stunk. And I was going to find it. I went back to the garage. Not for tools. For clues. There's something sacred about a space a person spends their life in. Dad had labeled everything. His handwriting was everywhere, on drawers, jars, even masking tape. And in the corner cabinet, behind the sawdust-covered blueprints. I found it. A narrow wooden box. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a printed scan of a document labeled, Draft 1, notarized copy, filed with Miles. Filed with Miles. Dr. Miles. Dad's old friend. A retired notary and former Navy buddy who used to visit every few weeks just to talk about baseball and drink instant coffee. And suddenly I remembered the recording. Dr. Miles has it. He helped me notarize it. It's dated 2 months ago. My heart was pounding. I grabbed my keys. Called Dr. Miles. He remembered Dad immediately. Said he'd been waiting for my call. An hour later, I sat in his den, walls lined with books, baseball caps, and dusty Navy plaques. He handed me a sealed folder. I kept it safe, he said. Your dad asked me to notarize it and hang on to it until, well. Until now. He paused. But that woman, your mom, came by 2 weeks ago, asking if he had ever dropped anything off here. I froze. What did you tell her? That I didn't know anything, he said calmly. But I locked this away right after. I nodded. That night, I read every word of the real will. Dad left the house to me. Left a portion of savings to charity. Left a letter, typed but signed, with one line highlighted. If this will is not the one presented at the time of my passing, then something has gone wrong, and my son will know what to do. He was right. I did. I didn't sleep that night. The reel will lay flat on my desk, still in its sealed folder. I didn't want to crease it. Didn't want to smudge the signature. Didn't want to touch it more than I had to. Because even holding it felt like holding my father's last defense. One that never made it to the battlefield in time. Dr. Miles had offered to go public with what he knew. He said, "Your dad made me swear I'd protect this if anything ever seemed off." And this? This smells worse than rot. But I told him to wait. Because this wasn't about courtrooms or affidavits. Not yet. This was about dignity. About truth. And about making sure everyone saw the lie for what it was, exactly when it mattered most. The funeral was 5 days away. 5 days until family, friends, co-workers, neighbors. All gathered in one place, hanging on to words about a man who meant something to each of them in different ways. She would be there. Front row. Veil on. Maybe even trembling for effect. She'd probably read something. A poem. A letter from the heart. She'd talk about his legacy. His wishes. His trust in her. And no one would question it. Not unless I gave them a reason to. I needed proof. More than a signature. More than a date. I needed the method. How she pulled it off. And why no one had caught it. Because exposing a lie isn't enough, you have to show how deep it ran, how quiet it was, how real it pretended to be. So I went back to the house. Not my house anymore. Not yet, not legally. But it still smelled like sawdust and motor oil. Still creaked in the same spots. Still felt like Dad in the corners. She wasn't there when I arrived. Out getting groceries, apparently. I didn't ask. I didn't care. I walked to the master bedroom. To their shared dresser. Dad always kept a small wooden tray on top, where he emptied his pockets each night. Coins, a handkerchief, sometimes a folded list. It was gone now. Cleared off. The surface looked cleaner than it ever had, polished, even. Too polished. I opened the top drawer. Socks. Neatly rolled. Not his. Scarves, perfume, a few packets of aspirin. I pulled the drawer wider, and that's when I felt it catch. The stopper. But I'd lived in this house. I knew the drawer trick. Knew that if you lifted the back corner and tilted, a small compartment underneath would reveal itself. Dad kept small things there. Private things. Nothing valuable, just his version of a vault. And there it was. A small envelope. Unmarked. Thin. Almost overlooked. Inside. One photo. And one handwritten note. The photo was grainy, a little out of focus. But I knew what it was immediately. It showed my father in his hospital bed. His hand outstretched. His eyes half closed. And my mother, beside him. Holding his wrist. Pressing his thumb into a document on a clipboard. She didn't know the photo had been taken. It was caught in the background of another picture, one of a nurse taking a celebratory photo with her shift team in front of a whiteboard. Dad and Mom were blurred in the back corner. But the moment had been captured. And it was enough. Enough to raise questions. Enough to make people look twice. The note was Dad's handwriting. Crooked. But unmistakable. If you found this, it means she tried. I didn't think she would. But I saw the way she looked at the folder last week. The way she asked about the lawyer's hours. If she brought anything to you with my thumbprint on it, check the date. I hadn't signed anything in weeks. I sat down on the edge of the bed. And for the first time in all of this, I felt rage. Not confusion. Not grief. Rage. Because it wasn't just betrayal. It was exploitation. Of a man who couldn't speak for himself. Of trust. Of death. Of legacy. Of me. I placed the photo and note into a separate folder. I didn't want to contaminate the will. I labeled this one, funeral proof. It was a cruel name. But fitting. I went downstairs. Made tea. Sat in the dark. And I planned. There was no satisfaction in the idea of revenge. Not really. Just necessity. If the truth stayed quiet, it would die. Just like Dad. And I wasn't about to let that happen. I called Dr. Miles the next morning. Told him I had everything I needed. And that I'd be in touch the night before the funeral. He didn't ask questions. Just said, "Your father would be proud." I'm not sure that's true. But I hoped it would be, eventually. Mom called later that day. Asked if I'd be speaking at the service. I told her no. She seemed relieved. I could hear it in her voice. She said she'd prepared something beautiful. I'm sure she had. I hung up and stared at the ceiling. Then I opened the real will again. And read the last line over and over. If you're reading this, then she's already made her move. And if you're standing by her, I failed you both. But if you're not, then I know you did what I couldn't. You saw her clearly. And you chose light. Dad never told me what to do. Even now, he didn't. He just gave me the map. And left the destination up to me. But I knew where I was headed. And it started, at the funeral. The thing about a signature is, it can be forged. Painstakingly. Carefully. Even convincingly. But a thumbprint? That's different. A thumbprint isn't just evidence of intent. It's the illusion of consent. And sometimes, it's a weapon. After finding the photo and the handwritten note from Dad, I knew I had enough to challenge her. Enough to raise questions. Enough to tear through her image like sunlight through fog. But I didn't want enough. I wanted certainty. I wanted the kind of truth that doesn't stutter under pressure. The kind you can't ignore, even if you're standing on a church altar in front of a grieving family. So I made an appointment with a document examiner. A quiet man in his 60s. Private office. Framed degrees and crime scene photos on the wall. The kind of place that smelled like old paper and hidden facts. I handed him 2 documents. The will my mother submitted as official. A scan of my dad's real, notarized will, dated 2 months prior. He looked at me, eyebrows raised. "Do you suspect forgery?" he asked. I didn't answer directly. "I just need to know what's real," I said. He examined them for almost 2 hours. Magnifying lens. Scans. Side-by-side comparison. I sat across from him, silent. Watching every flick of his pen, every furrow in his brow. Finally, he spoke. "The signature," he said, "looks legitimate." My stomach sank. But. He leaned closer. "The thumbprint?" He tapped the document Mom had submitted. "There are microcompressions inconsistent with live pressure." I blinked. "What does that mean?" He nodded slowly. "Professional. Precise. It means this fingerprint wasn't placed by someone pressing their own thumb. It was likely pressed onto the paper, manually." He let the silence stretch. "Either after your father lost motor function, or after he passed." It hit like a stone dropped in a still lake. Ripples of horror. Rage. Sadness. Not because I didn't already suspect it. But because now. I had confirmation. Cold. Unbiased. Scientific. The examiner wrote me a full report. Detailed language. Legal phrasing. Professional neutrality that only made the truth sting harder. Before I left, I asked him, "How common is this?" He looked at me for a long time. "More than you think," he said. "Especially when someone's about to lose power." I drove home in silence. No music. No calls. Just the rhythmic thud of tires against pavement and a heartbeat I couldn't quiet. At home, I laid everything out on the dining table. The forged will. The real will. The photograph. Dad's note. The forensic report. It looked like a trial exhibit. But there wouldn't be a courtroom. Because I wasn't after punishment. I was after revelation. Let her speak. Let her stand in front of our friends, our family, our neighbors. Let her perform. Let her lie, one last time. Then let the truth break the room open. The next few days were quiet. I spoke to no one. Didn't answer calls. Didn't check emails. Didn't return messages from family asking, "How's your mom holding up?" The house was still. But inside me, storms brewed. Not the kind that shout. The kind that wait. Then the call came. Mom. Her voice was soft, almost sweet. "We'll need you to arrive early at the church. I want to go over the service order." I agreed. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask what I'd been up to. But her tone changed, just for a second, before she hung up. "Oh, and there's something I'll be reading at the podium." Something he would have wanted me to say. I smiled. I wasn't sure if she could hear it in my voice. But I smiled when I said, "Then you should definitely say it." That night, I sat at Dad's desk. Opened his old drawer. Took out one of the fountain pens he loved. Signed my name at the bottom of the truth. Then sealed it all in one envelope. On the outside, I wrote, "To be read immediately after the eulogy." No one else knew. Not the pastor. Not my cousins. Not the lawyer. Just me. And the storm I was about to set loose. I didn't sleep that night. But I didn't toss either. Because for the first time in weeks, the decision wasn't tearing me apart. It was aligning me. Dad had trusted me to finish what he started. To protect not his name, but his truth. And I would. The morning of the funeral, I ironed a clean white shirt. Black tie. No jacket. I slipped the envelope into a leather folio. Then I stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. Not searching for strength. Just recognizing it. At the church, the pews filled slowly. Faces I hadn't seen in years. Neighbors, co-workers, old friends. Everyone came to honor him. But the front row. That was hers. Dressed in black lace. Veil in place. Lips painted into a sorrowful smile. She held the microphone like it belonged to her. And as she walked toward the pulpit, she nodded to me. One queen. One stage. And the kingdom she thought she ruled. There's a peculiar stillness that fills a church before a funeral begins. It's not silence. Not really. It's the sound of restraint, people breathing carefully, tissues rustling, someone quietly clearing their throat to hold back something bigger. You can feel the air thick with memory. With judgment. With old history rising like dust off the pews. The front rows were filled with the expected. Uncles. Neighbors. Friends of the family who remembered Dad as the guy who fixed their porch or came to every high school football game, even the ones we lost by 40 points. Some people wore solemn faces. Others wore the kind of grief you wear when you're supposed to. But all eyes were on her. She sat in the center of the front pew, dressed in a flawless black dress with delicate beading that shimmered under the church lights. A lace veil draped softly over her hair, not enough to hide her face, but just enough to signal curated pain. In her hands was a printed speech, held in crisp white paper, folded once with intentional elegance. She looked composed. Dignified. Grieving. A woman carrying her husband's memory with grace. And it was a lie. When the music faded and the pastor stepped back from the pulpit, she stood. Slowly. Deliberately. She walked toward the microphone like she was approaching royalty, not sorrow. And when she spoke, her voice came soft, warm, and rehearsed. Edward Henry Walker was not just a husband, or a father. He was a builder. A protector. And the man who gave this family its heart. People nodded. Some sniffled. He always said, family first, even if it costs you everything. And he lived that until the very end. She paused. Let the silence linger. Before he passed, he told me things. Private things. Things he wanted me to carry. One of those things was his final wish. For peace. For unity. For trust. Her hand trembled slightly as she held the paper. She let her voice crack, just once. Beautifully. I didn't interrupt. Not yet. Let her have the stage. Let her build the house of mirrors. Because when it broke, I wanted everyone to see it shatter. I know this has been difficult for some of us, she continued, her voice lowering, but I hope you all know, he died knowing I would carry out his vision. That I would honor what he built, and protect it. Another pause. She wiped beneath her eye, no tear. Just shadow. And I will. Because that's what he asked of me. Because that's what love does. The audience applauded softly. A few people murmured words of agreement. The mask was complete. The act, flawless. She stepped back from the microphone and turned to sit down. But I stood before she reached the pew. Envelope in hand. Our eyes locked. She froze. I walked to the podium slowly. Deliberately. No words yet. I simply set the envelope on the wood surface in front of the mic. Then turned to her and said, for everyone to hear. Mom, if you really loved him, read this. Gasps. A few heads turned. She blinked. A flicker of something behind her eyes, fear, maybe, or anger dressed as confusion. She stepped forward. Took the envelope. Her fingers trembled now. Not beautifully. Not for show. Because she knew. Maybe not everything inside. But enough. She opened it. Pulled out the folded letter. The will. The note. The picture. And then she read the first line out loud. To my son, I leave everything I built. The house, the savings, the garage, the legacy. Because he is the one who never asked for more. And the only one who never tried to take it. The church fell silent. So silent, I could hear someone shift in the back row. A baby stir. A breath catch in a throat. Her hands shook harder now. She kept reading. To my wife, Evelyn. If this is being read aloud, it means you tried to rewrite me. And if you're reading it now, then my son has already undone the lie. She stopped. Eyes wide. People began to whisper. She looked around, like maybe someone would stop this. Step in. Save her. No one moved. She tried to speak again. Voice hoarse now. This wasn't the final. But the pastor stepped forward, gently took the document from her hand, and read the closing line. I trust my son to make the truth known. Not for me. But so he'll never again be asked to pretend. She stepped back. Almost stumbled. And I looked her in the eye one last time. Not with fury. Not with triumph. Just, completion. There's a certain kind of silence that only truth can summon. Not the kind that asks for patience. Not the kind that waits. But the kind that shifts the air, all at once. Like someone cracked open a window in a room full of gas and struck a match. That's what the church felt like after my mother read those first few lines. She stood there, frozen. The envelope in one hand, the reel will shaking in the other. Her lips parted, but no words came. Behind her, people shifted in their pews. A few leaned forward. Others leaned back. Everyone looking, not at me anymore, but at her. The pastor took the paper from her hands gently, respectfully, but without hesitation. There was something final about it. Like he had seen enough. He unfolded the document in front of the microphone. His voice was steady, professionally detached, but not cold. And as he began to read, the entire church leaned in. This is the notarized last will and testament of Edward Henry Walker, dated 2 months before his passing, signed in the presence of Dr. Marcus Miles, and registered with the state clerk on April 2. The date alone caused another ripple in the room. The official will, my mother's version, was dated weeks later. But no one interrupted. No one even breathed. To my son, James, I leave the home I built with my hands, the savings I worked my whole life to gather, and the tools I used to raise him, because those things are only meaningful in the hands of someone who understands their value. A sharp intake of breath behind me. Someone whispered my name. To Evelyn, my wife, I leave no further assets beyond what we already shared. I do this not out of bitterness, but because trust, once broken, does not rebuild itself in silence. You will know why. And so will our son. At that moment, she sat down. Not gracefully. Not deliberately. She collapsed into the pew like the words had physically hit her. She wasn't crying. She wasn't fuming. She was just, stunned. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel afraid of her. The pastor cleared his throat, continued reading. If this version of my will is not the one presented at the time of my passing, I request that my son, James, be allowed to present it on my behalf. This is not to humiliate or to punish, but to protect what I gave my life for. He paused. Then looked up, at me. And then, with a small nod, he read the final line. May truth outlive me. May my son be free. When he finished, he folded the paper back into the envelope and placed it on the podium. No applause. No outrage. Just silence, deep and sacred. Like the room itself was trying to absorb what it had just witnessed. My mother didn't look up. She kept her hands folded in her lap. One foot tapping rapidly, as if trying to flee without moving. I didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. The words had already done what I never could. They had removed her mask. After a few moments, the pastor looked at me. Would you like to say anything? I shook my head. And then, surprising even myself, I said. He already did. I turned to walk back to my seat. As I did, someone stood. An uncle, maybe. Or one of Dad's old friends from the auto shop. Then another. And another. No applause. No dramatics. Just quiet, respectful recognition. And Mom sat there, the only one who didn't move. After the service, people came up to me. Some just nodded. Some hugged me. Some looked at me like they didn't know me anymore, but not in fear. In understanding. One woman, a former neighbor, whispered. I always knew he was quieter when she was in the room. But I didn't realize how much he wasn't allowed to say. Outside the church, I watched her leave. She didn't say goodbye. Didn't look my way. She walked to her car alone, her heels clicking against the pavement like punctuation marks in a sentence no one wanted to hear. And when she pulled away, I felt something uncoil in my chest. It wasn't victory. It wasn't satisfaction. It was space. Room to breathe. Room to be. Room, finally, to mourn. Dad was gone. But for the first time in years. He had been heard. After the funeral, she disappeared. Not like a thief in the night, no dramatic exit, no broken windows or last words. She simply vanished from the town. Packed up her things within a week. Left no forwarding address. Changed her number. The only thing she left behind was her wedding ring, sitting silently on the kitchen counter in a small porcelain dish. Like it had been waiting for her to leave it there all along. There was no lawsuit. No dramatic confrontation. No press release. She didn't contest the will. Didn't deny it. Didn't even try to reclaim her version of the truth. Because there was no one left to believe her. And maybe, in the end, that's what she feared most. The house came back to me officially a month later. Keys in hand. Deed in my name. But walking through it the first time felt nothing like victory. It felt like standing inside a memory that had aged faster than it should have. The wallpaper was still the same. Dad's chair still faced the window. The clock above the kitchen ticked like it had never stopped, even though, in some ways, everything else had. I didn't move anything for a while. Just lived around it. A ghost moving through another ghost's home. For weeks, I'd walk into rooms and instinctively expect him to be there, elbow deep in an engine part, scribbling notes on a napkin, humming under his breath. And then I'd remember. He wasn't. He never would be again. Grief doesn't always come during the storm. Sometimes it waits for the quiet. For the silence after the thunder. And in that silence, it seeps in, through cracks in the walls, through moments you thought would feel triumphant. That's when it really starts. Not when someone dies. But when they stay gone. I spent the first night back in the garage. On the floor. With the lights off. Just listening. To the creak of the beams. To the ticking of the water heater. To the stillness he had once filled so completely. I didn't cry. Not at first. I just sat there. Hands clasped. Jaw tight. Because the rage had left. The shock had passed. And all that remained was a strange, heavy emptiness. Not regret. Not guilt. Just, space. In the weeks that followed, I slowly began to move through the house with new hands. Not to erase him. But to understand him. To learn the language of the man I thought I already knew, but hadn't fully met until he died. I found little things. Labels on boxes that made me laugh. Notes in margins that made me ache. A shoebox filled with sketches of a patio he never built, but always dreamed of. He had lived more quietly than I'd realized. And more deliberately than I had ever given him credit for. And the most surprising thing? There was peace in that. Not closure. Peace. Because closure implies something is finished. And Dad? He wasn't finished. Not with me. I kept the garage the same. Didn't sell the tools. Didn't update the walls. I added one thing, a small wooden frame, hung above the workbench. Inside it was the last line of his real will. May truth outlive me. May my son be free. I looked at that line every day. Not to remind myself of what she did. But to remember what he still gave me. People still asked about her. At the grocery store. At church. At the mechanics. Some with concern. Some with quiet judgment. I didn't explain. Didn't spread stories. Didn't open old wounds just to watch them bleed again. I simply said. She's where she needs to be. And so am I. I found healing in small things. Fixing the porch light. Making coffee the way he did, too strong, too early. Repainting the front step, even though no one asked me to. Living. That's what he would have wanted most. Not revenge. Not bitterness. Just, life. There was a letter I never sent. I wrote it one night, after the first time I felt truly okay. It said. I don't hate you. But I don't trust you. And I won't rebuild something you never valued in the first place. But if you're wondering whether you broke me, you didn't. Dad made sure of that. I burned the letter after I wrote it. Because some things are meant to be felt, not delivered. I didn't forgive her. But I didn't carry her anymore, either. And in that balance, I found peace. Forgiveness isn't what people say it is. It's not a warm feeling that shows up when enough time has passed. It's not the same thing as reconciliation. It's not about saying, it's okay, when it wasn't. When it still isn't. Forgiveness is quieter than that. Harder than that. Sometimes, it looks like nothing at all from the outside. But inside? It's the exact moment you stop giving someone power over your peace. For a long time, I thought forgiving my mother would mean letting her back in. Letting her explain. Letting her cry. Letting her turn pain into poetry and say, I made mistakes, but we're still family. But then I realized. Family isn't a shield you get to hide behind after you've burned down the house. Forgiveness came to me differently. It came on an ordinary Tuesday, while I was drinking coffee in Dad's garage with the door halfway open. Sunlight poured in across the concrete floor like something gentle. There was no noise. Just birds. And me. Breathing without flinching. Existing without defending. I realized I didn't want to spend my life proving what she did to people who would never understand. I didn't want to replay the betrayal on loop, like a movie that couldn't end. And I definitely didn't want her in my head every time I made a decision, wondering if she'd approve, if she'd criticize, if she'd twist it. So I stopped letting her live there. That was forgiveness. Not the kind that hugs. The kind that releases. Some people think forgiveness means weakness. That it means letting people off the hook. But I didn't forgive her for her sake. I forgave her so I could walk through my own front door without hearing echoes of her voice in the drywall. So I could sit in my father's chair without wondering if I looked like a man who let people get away with things. I didn't speak to her again. Not because I hated her. But because I respected myself. And sometimes, the only boundary that protects your peace, is distance. I kept Dad's will in the same folder he used for taxes. Labeled clearly. Stored quietly. I didn't show it to everyone. Didn't frame it on the wall. Because the point was never revenge. It was restoration. And I already had that. On what would have been his birthday, I drove to the cemetery alone. No flowers. Just a folding chair. A thermos of coffee. And an old radio that barely worked. I sat by the grave and poured a cup. Turned the radio dial until I found static with music behind it. And I just sat. 4 hours. Not crying. Not praying. Just, keeping him company. Before I left, I said one thing out loud. Not because I thought he'd hear it. But because I needed to say it. I didn't let her win. But I didn't let her ruin me, either. And somehow, that felt like the most important part. Forgiveness isn't always beautiful. Sometimes it's boring. Routine. A decision you make again and again, like choosing what to eat or whether to lock your door at night. But over time, it stops hurting. Stops bleeding. And starts becoming part of your shape, not your wound. I built a small bench outside the garage. Engraved his name into the wood. Not big. Not loud. Just enough. Because that's what Dad was, just enough. And more than enough. Some days I still think of her. Not with rage. Not with longing. Just, a quiet recognition. Like seeing an old scar and remembering how it felt when it was fresh. But I don't go back. Not even in my mind. Because some people don't belong in your future. No matter how much of your past they occupy. The house is mine now. But more importantly, so is my peace. And I won't trade it for anything. Not even reconciliation. Because this version of me, he's free.